Welcome to Playthink, conversations about games, interactivity, art, and culture. This podcast is recorded live at the USC Game Innovation Lab, which is part of the USC Games program at the University of Southern California. For more information, follow us on Instagram at USC Game Innovation Lab or visit our website at gameinnovationlab.com/playthink.
Welcome back to Playthink. Today we have Cheryl Platz with us. Cheryl Platz is someone whose work has shaped how many of us think about UX, storytelling, and communication. She has worked on things like Sims, Disney Friends, as well as large enterprise products such as Alexa and Cortana, as well as being a leader at Riot and Scopely. She is not only a leader, speaker, educator, but also the author of the Game Development Strategy Guide and Designed Beyond Devices. I've also heard you're a fantastic improv actor. And I'm Bernice Wang. I'm a graduating master's student at USC Games. So nice to meet you, Cheryl.
Wonderful to meet you too. And it's a good thing that I have some improv experience because it's chaotic here right now. And I apologize if you hear booping in the background because there's active fire alarm testing at my building. But it's a delight to be here with y'all at USC. I'm very excited to talk about our shared love of games.
No worries. It's Mercury retrograde, as we talked about earlier. So I want to start off with chronologically say, early in your career, you were designing for handheld systems, and UX wasn't really a formal conversation in games yet. But those hardware limitations had required you to think a lot about player choice, clarity, and agency. What were you noticing about players back then that shaped how you design today?
It's such an interesting question. Thank you. It was, in many ways, the honor of a lifetime to get to work on a launch title for the Nintendo DS. And at first, interacting with touch in a game was very much like a toy interaction, right? When we shipped the Urbz on the Nintendo DS, some people would just stay on the loading screen where we had sort of a record you could scratch for extended periods of time because that was a type of experience that you just couldn't get anywhere else because this is just pre-iPhone. It's easy to forget now how groundbreaking the Nintendo DS was. Not just for the touch interaction, but it also supported basic voice interaction, and of course it had two screens. What do you even do with that? But anytime something pushes the boundaries like that, it also means you have no training wheels. You have nothing, no muscle memory, nothing to count on. And so anything you want to do, you have to lean in. You have to teach players how to do those things. And for early games on the DS, especially, that meant that you had to make a choice. Either you were going to go sort of the WarioWare approach where you would just do really bold choices and hope people would figure it out, or you would do sort of safe incremental choices so people who weren't safe experimenting would still have a good time. And both methods were fine. One lesson on Disney Friends in particular was that we wanted, if you just did voice interaction, it would still leave people behind who weren't comfortable with voice interaction or couldn't voice interact. So even though it was very important to me that we were immersive by doing voice interaction, we ended up also supporting touch interaction to have the same effect with those friends. So you could pull out a voice equivalent menu that showed all the voice interactions. You could tap it and you would essentially say the same thing. So you could tell Stitch, I love you, or you could tap the menu item that did the same thing.
Mm. Sounds like you had to design multiple solutions for different kinds of players. Can you tell us more about those kinds of constraints and what kind of those constraints made you better at understanding players?
Yeah, thanks for the question. In addition to that, so that was one thing that really influenced my work permanently, was that understanding that multimodal design, the goal, the holy grail, is adaptivity. And that struck me when I eventually got to work on things like Alexa, and everyone's like, oh, voice only. I'm like, no, not voice only, voice and, because eventually, because if you do voice only, you're leaving people behind that can't do voice. But in the same way, I talk in the first chapter of my book about the motivators of play. And there are a million different frameworks to talk about fun and cognitive psychology and gaming, and you can choose whichever one you want. You don't have to choose mine. But the main point that I'm trying to drive home, and that all of us who try to talk about those things try and drive home, is different players come to games for different reasons. And again, on Disney Friends, one of the stories I talk about in my book was this was shown to me very directly, because I had a game design auteur's vision with my friend Amy Calson, who was my lead designer, and we wanted it to be immersive and be about the friendship. And so we had made some very intentional choices not to have user interface in the way. And we put the game in front of kids. Our target market, Stitch, it's like catnip for little boys. But when we put it in front of a mixed audience, boys and girls, the girls were like, I love this. I could do this for ages. And the boys were like, I don't get it. And for a second, I had this moment of, oh no, I am a failure. How did I ruin Stitch? Like watch it, like it genuinely just deeply surprised me. And those moments are gifts in your career, because they challenge you and they make you a better designer if you're willing to listen, if you're willing to let yourself be affected. And we could have thrown the whole game concept out, right? But that was also not the point. When we really looked at the feedback from these kids, you can't expect them to tell you how to fix the game, but they're like, I don't get it. I don't know what to do next. And Amy and I looked at each other. We're like, it can't be as simple as just giving them one objective, right? It couldn't be that we just broke the mastery motivator. And so we added these sparkles for when you did something nice to the characters. And then we added 1 meter up at the top, your daily friendship points goal for that character. And then we retested the girls. That didn't get in the way of the friendship. So the girls still loved it. And the boys were like, I love this. I could do this. Yeah, it's great. And so we didn't have to change the core of the game, but we spoke to different motivators. Boys wanted to be good at something, so we made them good at friendship. The girls were intrinsically motivated by friendship, so they did not need the goal to tell them how to be friends. Now, I don't say this to say like, you should design games for boys and girls, because gender is a construct, and there are girls who fit the category that those boys looked like, and right? It's not about boys and girls. It's about different players bringing different motivators, and society kind of like pushing kids especially into different buckets. But that was such a great gift, working on that game, watching kids work with, like, experience that game in real time, and seeing how their reaction to it changed based on our changes to the game design.
That's such a magical moment. I'm curious, have you found later in your career perhaps more conflicting motivations, and that led you to make an intentional choice?
That's a really good question. Conflicting motivations. Well, one place where that happens is monetization, right? When you're working on a free-to-play game, there's always the tension between, like, there's players who are going to want you to give them more free stuff or make the game fully free, versus the very real need to pay to keep the lights on. And how do you create an experience that serves both of those needs? Or how do you acknowledge which need you're not going to serve in the moment? And, I think, I talk about in the book, the sort of patterns of failures to thrive. One common conflict that comes up when you are working on games, especially when you start getting around pay to win or pay for power patterns in monetization, is when you're, let's acknowledge, like, live service games are a thing, right? And they're a relatively new thing. And if you've never worked on one before, the first time you work on one and you start to look at the numbers, I'm not going to talk about any specific game, but you start to look at the numbers, there will be players and that spend so much money that it will kind of, it makes some people lose their balance. It's very tempting to just chase a few players, and once once you understand that, you look at the rest of the game design industry and you're like, oh, that's why that game's doing that weird thing. That's why that game is so unbalanced. But here's the thing that we don't really talk about is that there's so many players who are underserved because we're not teaching them how to play our games. It's way more sustainable to charge 1 million players $10 than one player $10,000. That one player gets laid off, your game has a bad month. But if you're teaching a bunch of players how to play the game and charge small amounts of money, like give you small amounts of money for things, then you're not you don't need. I've known games that have like literal almost one-to-one relationships between influencers or heavy spenders and like employees, just to make sure that they like that's not a sustainable business model. So it's just it's wild. So that conflict is there, right? That tension is there. And the other tension that I've come across is as when you have game designers versus user experience designers. And I don't say versus because I think those two things should be countered, but sometimes you have game designers who feel like the goal is to be difficult, and user experience designers who are like, and they feel like the user experience designers asking for onboarding are asking to make the game easy, but that's not necessarily the point. One of the things I talk about in the book, the Game Development Strategy Guide, is like the symbiosis between game design and user experience design when they're working really well together. It's like game design is intentionally using friction, like good friction, whereas user experience design is trying to find the bad friction. Like we've all played games where inventory management is not fun, and you weren't probably not making an inventory management game. User experience design can yeet that out the window so they can get back to whatever your core loop actually was. And onboarding players doesn't actually make your game easier. It just makes your game accessible to players so they can go experience the challenge you intended them to experience in the first place. And that is a mind shift that I've had to like really lean into in several places where they really wanted to be like, they'll learn by going somewhere else. We don't need to teach new players. I'm like, so you don't like money, so you don't like growth. Like it's really important to like invest in the growth of your player communities. So a bit of a rambling answer, but those are like two big tension points, right? Both that overinvestment in high spenders and that lack of investment in the growth of new players through onboarding and accessibility to your core loop.
Wonderful. Then going a little deeper about the UX and the design working together, you talk about how onboarding is a bit outdated and we need new kind of tutorial. How do you define success in those first 15 minutes that you say it's very important to hold on to the player?
It's a really, really interesting question. And I too, my perspective continues to change, right? And players continue to change. I think many of us for a long time felt like you needed to throw everything at the player before you let them off the rails, and you needed to teach them everything they needed to know or else you were going to fail, right? And what I'm learning, especially with mobile games, is that there is a ceiling. Players are only going to give you a max session time. And so you're never going to be able to teach them everything in that max session time. If they get overwhelmed, they will go away. If you didn't teach them just enough to keep them wanting more, to want to come back, they will go away. And so the challenge in those first 15 minutes is to help them understand that the problem in your game is so worth solving, it's worth coming back to you versus the 10,000 other games they can choose from. And that's really tough because they may be invested in a different ecosystem. They may be in a rush. They may be looking for something very specific. And if you're giving them something really basic up front, if you're not connecting with them emotionally, if you're not giving them a vision to what could be, then they very well may walk away. And that's a hard thing, right? The easy thing is for us to just be like, I'm going to teach you all the things. But what you're really looking for probably, and I'm not saying that any of my games recently have gotten this 100% right, but the best 15-minute experience is probably something that makes it clear what motivators of play will be sort of addressed or available through this game, gives a moment of emotional connection or unique brand moment, gives the player agency, right? Like not a 15-minute cutscene, but something like direct and tangible, and makes the player feel like their time mattered, like they had a choice or something, that agency led to something. So they already feel like they've made some sort of investment in the game. And the next part is they know what to do next, which is some place where we all fall down, right? Like they come back their second session and we're like, great, cool, go to the home screen and figure it out. And that long-term onboarding ramp look, I get it. It's hard. That's player state. That's tracking over time. I've tried to do that in business to business. I've tried to do that in games. It's a hard nut to crack. But on-demand learning, like learning over time, that's the reality we live in, especially with shorter session times. You have to meet players where they are, and not all players learn the same way. Some players want to go fail, figure out what they need to learn, and then come back. Some players are like, I will not go into matchmaking until I feel completely prepared to win an Olympic gold medal. And, like you need to figure out like which learning styles you're going to support and how you're going to get players to those learning experiences. But those first 15 minutes, it's so competitive right now. And so it speaks partially to the platform, right? Like it's most competitive on mobile where they're probably on a bus. They probably have a bunch of other stuff. They could probably walk away. Know what your platform standards are. Know what your player agency moment is, know what your emotional impact is, and make it clear to the player where they're going to go next.
That's such a practical framework for design. What are some of your favorite ways to visualize this complex progression? Are there perhaps some better suited for others for specific design problems? I guess that's a two-parter.
Well, I spend a lot of time in tools like Miro. When we start getting into things like this, there's no one magical tool. I am grateful to my training and user experience because like journey maps, although journey maps didn't exist when I started my user experience training, like they sort of came up a decade later, but I'm happy to have sort of been along for the journey. When I came, no pun intended, when I came to Scopely and Marvel Strike Force, one of the first things I did, because when I was interviewing for that job, I hadn't played Marvel Strike Force much, but one of the things that helped me get that job was like, I went hard. Like when I was talking to my manager, Rich, I was like, okay, I'm level 10, I'm level 14, I'm level 32. I got my husband to it. I'm in an alliance now, right? And that experience, as we all know, as game designers, you only get that first time experience once, right? So I was like taking notes. I'm like logging my emotional journey. I'm like logging what I'm seeing from other people. And so when I got into the company, one of the first things I did, they had like this next jam thing where we had a couple days where we could do whatever we wanted. It was like, I want to document the end-to-end player journey, because one thing I had heard people say was all of our players have the same experience, which was patently untrue. The experience I had at level 20 was different than the experience I had at level 50, was far different than the experience I knew that the influencer I was watching at level 90 was having. And so I needed, as user experience director, to help champion player experiences and help the team understand that no, we are not designing for the same player. Like this player doesn't have access to all these features. This player is about to experience a cliff where they're not going to get unlocks for like 5 or 10 layers. This player is the one we're all targeting, but there's only a few of them, right? And once you put that all out there, put that journey map of Miro, if you don't break Miro, or Mural, those are both great tools, or whatever, you can use FigJam, whatever you want, whatever serves you, just use the tool that serves you. But the point is building shared understanding. And that's not just for design, that's for engineering, that's for production, that's for leadership, to make sure that everybody knows this, that everybody can see it and say like, oh, you're right. Like that is weird that we're having players skip these levels where we do all the teaching. It is weird that like this thing, like we were saving user experience features as like rewards, and that's really weird. Was really weird. So that started some really good conversations. I'm like, so you're punishing early players with like user experience friction, like they're just going to bounce off, they're going to go somewhere else. Like that just looks like we're not good at design. Like there's other ways we can motivate players than like use good design as like a carrot. Like the good design should be baseline. And so those are the tools. And when we talk about abstract tools, right? Another tool I use a lot is storyboarding and flows to tell, because we get so focused, especially in user experience, but sometimes in game design too, on like the moment, like this is my screen, this is my thing. But most of what we do is about time. It's about movement through time. And so one of the things I'm most proud of on Marvel Strike Force was we had a moment when it was my first week. They had this really big anniversary, 6th anniversary, and they had this really generous giveaway, and the really generous giveaway knocked their servers down so badly that that we had to disable redeem all orbs for months. And that had an actively harmful impact on players who were just accumulating hundreds and thousands of shards, and they wanted to redeem these orbs, but every time they would do that, it would just knock the servers down. And so obviously the fix was make the servers able to handle that volume. But as user experience designers and game designers, we kind of came to them, we're like, as long as we're doing this, why don't we also make the player experience better? Because there were some, when all those players came back online, they were going to have multi-use currencies that could only be spent all in one go, and that seemed bad. So we, I had put together some flows that showed like, hey, you could make the redeem 10 flow half as much time, and maybe people could do things that way. But when we started to talk about the problems we were going to solve, when we started to use these visualizations, it got us to a better shared agreement across all disciplines that led to the eventual solution that we all chose collectively in one of the most efficient half-hour meetings I've ever been in my life. We were like, you know what? We're going to do a logarithmic slider for orb redemption. It's not going to be redeem 10, redeem all. It's going to be redeem 10 or redeem more. And it'll just, you can move the slider and you can pick how many you want to redeem, and it will solve for basically all potential orb counts. And that solved for problems that existed before the issue. It was graceful. It solved for a real player problem. We took advantage of the fact that we had to put developer time on the problem, and we turned what players were upset about into a moment that Reddit was happy about. That doesn't happen every day.
That sounds incredible, making the best use of a situation. Yeah. Since mobile games are multimodal systems, I'm also wondering, when you moved into large-scale enterprise and voice systems like Alexa, you talk about how enterprise users also deserve game-level UX love. Where do you see non-game industries underestimating human psychology?
Oh boy, everywhere. But, the story I tell in my newsletter is just, the story I tell to build empathy is when I moved from games to IT software, and we were testing this product, System Center Configuration Manager, which is the software that for many years was used by most large corporations all the way through the government to deploy Windows to corporate PCs. Huge challenge, right? Millions and millions of CPUs. And one IT pro showed me the previous version of the software, which was so plagued with issues they had to go on an apology tour, which was part of why they hired me. But and he showed me the way that the computers were represented was a tree, right? Like, so there was a root node, and then you could expand it, and all the computers were there, which was actually terrible for performance purposes. But we don't have time to unpack all of that. He right clicks on the root node, and he shows me the right click menu, and delete is just up against all the other options there, right? Like, it's not separated by anything. Like, normally good menu design, like destructive actions are separated, and he looks at it, he's like, he points it, sort of indicates delete, and he's like, that delete, that's a resume generating event. And that phrase has stuck with me for decades, because, he's telling me that, he lives in fear of accidentally deleting the records of all of his company's PCs, which is allowed by our software. That's horrifying, right? Like, why do we put so much effort into like giving players good experiences when their jobs are not on the line? But we allow resume generating events to happen in our country's largest systems, right? So that has always haunted me, because he's the same, like, he's an Xbox fan, right? Like, so why? And the things, when I talk about motivators of play, self-expression, mastery, fun, like those are, we talk about them in the context of video games, but they're actually human motivators, right? If you satisfy them in other contexts, you get good outcomes. It's not a video game, but Alyssa Liu, who won the gold medal, was like, she was stressed out the last time she was at the Olympics because she wasn't self-expressing herself. She made a bunch of conscious choices, was like, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to choose the music. I'm going to choose my outfit. I'm going to choose everything. And she no longer experienced stress because the self-expression, like that motivated her enough to drown out everything else. And she won the biggest skating competition in the world, right? And had joy doing it. These motivators are much broader than just video game motivators. And so in places where you need good outcomes, it's, if you there's one thing I think that people really underestimate in corporate environments is corporations, companies, you have relationships with your customers. And there's a whole branch of game design around pro-social gaming. Companies like, Riot and Blizzard have spent years researching player behavior and trying to reduce patterns of toxic behavior, right? Why wouldn't companies also want to create positive communities? Why wouldn't they also want to lean into these design decisions in their software or in their community management? Those are absolutely things that can lead to better outcomes.
I'm actually quite curious. You mentioned before in your work that self-expression and companionship should sit at the top of a new hierarchy as player motivation, and that competition is actually a niche motivator. Why do you think many studios still design around competition?
Great question. And it's funny too, because I do mean to make a strong point, because motivation has changed. But obviously, the Olympics still exist, right? Competition hasn't gone away, but it's not a primary driver for many players when in a multiplayer environment. Why is that? To your point. Mm-hmm. I have a theory, and my theory is around largely, I think it was building, but the pandemic was a huge flashpoint. And one of the themes in my podcast, Enduring Play, which just launched season 2, is around the loss of third spaces. It comes up from a couple of different people I'm talking to. Third space theory being, we have work, we have home, and then we have the other place where we meet people, right? That could be, bars, civic organizations, but theaters, whatever. But many of those places have gone away or are no longer accessible to us. And so where do we make friends? Where do we exist as our real selves? Those places, we don't have them. And so a lot of places, people are turning to gaming for those things. And if gaming is the only place you have to be your true self, the only place you have to connect with people, leading with competition, which pushes people away, runs counter to your one chance to connect with other human beings. And I think that is why we're seeing such a shift. If we were all surrounded by if we were just all of our companionship needs were super met by just wonderful communities all around us, you'd probably see competition spiking, right? Group needs can change, but that is not what we have right now. Most support structures are failing. And so people are turning to games to give us what the real world can't.
What in the future do you see for multimodal systems, especially in the context that you just brought up, where the pandemic has changed the world and people are losing these third spaces?
Really good question. It's funny. My husband is a diehard VR gamer, which I never saw coming. We literally were choosing houses based on does it have a space for him to play VR? And yet that hasn't broken into the mainstream, right? Yeah. And the VR AR space, there's still, as someone who lives with physical disabilities, I think there's still something to be solved around just the literally physical pressure points, right? How do you solve for triggering migraines are a real thing. Lots of people have them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know when we get to the point where that's a solved problem, but I think that's the tipping point. There's just too much risk of real world consequence. There are players who can do it, and that's great. There are players who can't. When we talk about multimodality in other contexts, I haven't seen as much, it's interesting because I think we forget about the audio in mobile gaming. I'm trying to bring it back where I can. Obviously, you're not going to use it in spaces like traveling on a bus or something like that. But I'm a big believer using every possible modality you can. A, because it means that if someone can't use one modality, you always have a second to fall back on, or a third. And B, because for the few people who have all of them, it just gives you a richer experience. The reason I wrote Design Beyond Devices, and I was kind of a little ahead of my time, was because my experience working on experiences like the Echo Show was that's hard. It's hard to orchestrate uh, voice and touch and gesture and visuals, and it changes your approach changes based on like the player's physical relationship to the device and the output, right? Like if I'm far away from the device, I probably need to go more audio and less visual because I can't see the device. Like putting a bunch of text on the screen is not going to help if I can't read it. But if I'm close to the device, players are probably going to read a bunch of stuff, and then maybe just a little bit of lightweight text is better, and we want to direct more attention to the screen. And so that's where the spectrum of multimodality in my first book came up, was like trying to help people navigate the whole space.
It sounds like a lot of your design frameworks are based in empathy, accounting for accessibility, and meeting many motivations. I noticed they're deeply influenced by your background in improv theater. You adapted specifically the Crow framework. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And maybe also a time in your career where the context of the design required creative solutions outside traditional UX or games?
Sure. So the Crow framework is it's something we used in when I teach. I used to perform with a theater called Unexpected Productions out here in Seattle for 13 years. I performed professionally and taught with them. And one of the ways we helped people understand how to get to a compelling scene quickly was this Crow framework: character, relationship, objective, and where. Mm-hmm. And so I would teach players, stage players, not game players, but like, hey, the faster you can establish one or more of these things, the more your audience is going to believe this is a real scene, the more compelling this scene is going to be. Like this is what it takes to, but if that's what it takes to create real context on stage, that's probably also what it takes to create real context for stakeholders. Mm-hmm. It's probably also like the shorthand for what real context means in real life. And so it can be a helpful construct for people who are kind of trying to do their own user research. And one thing I observed coming out of the pandemic was we used to get a lot for free. We used to be able to assume that offices worked a certain way, or the people's homes worked a certain way. And what we learned in the pandemic, right, when we started like working from home, was that everyone's homes were different, right? Everybody had like an assumption of like what a home was, and you're like, oh wow, like you don't have a place to meet, you don't, or like you're all your meetings in the kitchen, or you're doing stuff in the garage, right? And that brings home the importance of the where in Crow, right? Like the context of use. Where is the device? What is around the person? Character breaks down into attitude, attributes, and actions. And it talks about like what is intrinsic to the person. It doesn't change frequently. What does the person have agency to change? And what do they care about, right? Relationship reminds us that the person has sort of connections to everything, and that connections to your company, connections to the phone. Like my attitude towards a device I own is different to my attitude to my computer that is a work computer, right? You ask me to install software on a work computer, I can't do the same things. My relationship to that device is different. And objective is important to remember because we forget it all the time. Like how many pop-ups have you noticed on websites where you're just trying to like literally exchange money for services and they're like, subscribe to a newsletter, right? Like, you're like, I was trying to do a commerce and you got in my way. And why are you doing that to me? And so I use that framework to remind like as a constant sort of shortcut for myself. And I try, it's funny too, as an author, like I try not to sound like I'm selling my books to people. So sometimes I don't tell people that I'm applying the thing. I'm just like, have we considered where this is going to be used? Or how does that player feel about their relationship with the company right now? Like, have you considered like how we look to them in this moment? I think one thing I remind people when I talk, to your point about like, how do I apply Crow as a game designer or a game developer? One thing you have to remember about the R in relationship is that, and the C character, the closer you get to identity, the stronger the emotional reaction you will get from players. Mm-hmm. And I saw this happen at Riot. I've seen it happen at Scope. I've seen it happen all places, right? Like you have to understand that like attributes, like things about players that don't change, like those, if you start hitting, like self-expression is powerful, but also if you start messing with it, you're going to have issues. And also the relationship between player and company, like that can also, the more they care, the more intense the emotional reaction will be if something is perceived to be wrong. And so gestures at Reddit, right? Like you get so many situations where people express things in anger, express things that seem not based in reality. And I have to ground people all the time. And like, it's not their job to understand our roadmap. They don't have access to all the data we have. It is our job to make the best, most responsible decisions for the health of this game that we can. But the fact that they care, the fact that they're reacting strongly, I mean, let's not do death threats, right? But the fact that they care is a gift because they're still here. They're still commenting. They could care about any other game, but they're here. And so Crow can be helpful in that respect because it's reminding you that like they're reacting to the relationship with the game or the company, right? It's more about that than it is the actual thing in many cases. And then you can take a step back and make the right choice for the moment.
That was incredible insight. In a minute, I will open up to questions from the audience. But real quick, I have just one last question for you, a reflective question. Looking across your career, what impact do you think feels most meaningful to you?
Interesting question. Most meaningful impact. I'd like to think that it's in front of me, but there's the things that I think I'm most proud of from like a game design perspective. Like Disney Friends, still, I think we had a lot of good, strong theories of change. There's the things I think had the biggest impact on the most people, like designing the Alexa notifications framework in a way that reduced the risk of interruptions to people. I know what it could have been, and I know what I achieved. But then, there's the work I did for the Gates Foundation, where I helped them see the need to upgrade their teleconferencing systems before the pandemic. And all of those things, none of those are related to games necessarily, but those things all prepared me for my work in games now. I returned to games after the pandemic, and that prepared me to be grounded and a good leader for Riot's entire user experience, discipline for my crafts teams. And now I'm a creative director and I run teams of multiple disciplines. And so I think the most important legacy I have will be helping people lead with curiosity. I've been doing that consistently for decades. And when I bring that into teams, I see how it transforms them.
Wow. That's wonderful. Something I would also like to keep trying in my student career and onwards. Thank you so much, Cheryl. We're going to open up to questions.
Hi, Cheryl. My name is Miles Gonzalez. I'm a second-year Master's of Fine Arts student. And my question was really just about your Crow method. I feel like in movies and games sometimes when we're first getting introduced to characters, sometimes it can take me out of it when a lot of character lore and background is just thrown at me. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on how to balance it or just how to make sure that the player isn't just overloaded with Crow information?
It's a great question, right? And I was just talking about this with someone else too, because there's a game and I'm not going to call it the game because I don't want them to feel like I'm judging them. There's a game I was really excited about from the last year's GDC, and I played it on the Next Fest this week, and it was just there's so much text, right? And so much to navigate. What you want to do is, first of all, show not tell, right? Like, how do you start figuring out, partnering with your artists, your narrative designers, to figure out how you can move some of what you want to convey into the environment, into inference, into discovery, right? Make the storytelling part of the gameplay, right? Some of the best games that do this, I assume you've played Unpacking, but if you haven't, have you played Unpacking?
Yes, I have.
Okay, yeah, like that was if for folks who haven't, like Unpacking is a very text-like game, but there's so much lore that evolves in that game without telling. And it's like the other end of the extreme. You can make people feel so much through like having them do things, having them ponder things. There is no right answer for like what is the right amount of things to ponder. That's a fun value decision you get to make. But that's what the importance of playtesting, right? You, as a designer, also get to decide, like when you go to players, how you let them explore in the world. And it's the importance of you being clear with your team, like, what is our goal? What do we want them to feel? What does success look like? And have we got there yet? Or do we want to keep moving around there? So apologies that there's no silver bullet, but for the character piece, that you want, I would say, like, give people small amounts, spread it out, let them explore through agency, like discover, pull it in, make it feel like they've chosen stuff, like especially relationship, like go build the relationship instead of like flinging the relationship at them. It'll be a lot more impactful and a lot less overwhelming.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, Cheryl. I'm Sankalp. I'm a first-year MS student, and I really appreciate the perspective you brought forth about like mobile game design, because before coming here, that's all I've worked in. I've just worked in mobile game design, and something that I struggled with a lot was a lot of the design has mainly been about like creating these pain points that are alleviated by spending money. So a lot of the UX elements that are also created with this mindset of just improving the KPIs, which is usually done by playing into the negative psychological elements like loss aversion, fear of missing out, and stuff like that. So I was just wondering if there's like a more healthy way of going about creating this experience.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? I mentioned too, like I've seen situations where it felt like we were withholding good UX design. On the spectrum of monetization that I share in chapter 11 of my book, there's 4 quadrants, right? We've got pay to access, which is just basically like the old school model, you pay for game. There's pay to accelerate, which is some of our mobile games where you're like, oh, I ran out of health, I wanna keep playing. There's the pay to express, which is your League of Legends pay for skins, and then there's pay for power, which is your Diablos, right? Like your stuff that's deeply tied to gameplay. If you as a game designer do not feel that the pay for power quadrant or the pay for accelerate quadrants serve you, your narrative, or your players, then the answer is to move things over to the other half of the monetization graph, which is part of why I put that tool together. Then, you see Helldivers do this with upfront charges, right? Like, so Helldivers is not free to play, it's some to play. There's a pay to access, but it's not as much as you would for a like full on retail, like $70 title. But they also allow for some pay to express for some upside so that the players who still really love the game and really want to express themselves can keep, funding new feature development and things like that. So you might choose to go fully self-express. And if you want to move your game fully into self-expression, then you need to create an environment where self-expression matters, right? Like you can't, if you just throw a bunch of profile frames in there, but it doesn't feel like any of them have meaning, players aren't going to spend money on them. But if you have stuff that's meaningful, players actually start to get mad at you that you can't pay for it. I could tell you that from experience. So it's figuring out what has intrinsic value in your system and leaning into that.
Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Hey, Cheryl. It's Reef here.
Hello.
Glad to have you here. I wanted to ask about archetypes earlier at the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about the DS. You mentioned that you kind of like had this, like for girls, for boys kind of archetypes. So I wanted to ask how that kind of evolved, how you kind of developed your understanding of archetypes to both to Enterprise and to like your more recent work at Riot and Scopely, how you kind of like how do you even like kind of start developing an archetype?
Thank you for the question. And so what's interesting is for Disney Friends, we didn't have like what we would call in user experience personas for it. We were mostly just sort of going off like general Disney fan. But the beauty of working at some of the larger places like Riot and Scopely is we get to work with centralized user research groups that often called insights teams, what have you, that help us build market segmentations or personas that help us understand like what are the patterns of behavior within our market and that helps us make intentional choices about who we're serving with a particular feature and who we are not. Because as you know, if you design for everybody, you end up designing for nobody. the DS at that time, we were largely designing for age groups, right? You'd be like, we were targeting a specific age group. And what we stumbled onto was that there were personas within that age group that we didn't know about until we tested with, right? Like there was clear gender differentiation that we didn't have data about. But, one of the best things about working at Scopely was like there was regular user research, like all the time, really good market segmentation. So you could talk about some of the different player patterns and be like, oh, this feature is really for this type of player who plays this much, and the reason they play is because they like the characters. It's not really because they want to be the most powerful. And so how do we give these people a feature that'll keep them coming back? That's not something that you as a game designer need to be an expert in. You just need to know who to talk to, or whether that's an external firm or someone inside your company. Usually user experience research or insights or the data and insights teams that can help you build market segmentations or these player profiles or personas.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hi, Cheryl. I'm a second-year BFA, Bachelor of Game Design, and I have a focus on production. I wonder that as a creative director of multidisciplinary teams, how do you approach leadership, and are there any differences in approaching teams under different departments?
Great question. Thank you. So one thing I mentioned is the leading with curiosity. That one of the nice, and I'll be honest, like I was intimidated by the concept of like leading teams for a while. Like I thought I just wanted to do the IC thing. But one thing I've realized coming into it is the nicest thing about leading teams is the ability to set culture, right? And so there's 4 norms that I've essentially either officially or unofficially been setting for my teams for a while now. Lead with curiosity, work out loud, which helps us deal with the hybrid situation that most of us are in all the time, which is basically like, even if you have hallway conversations, like document, like put it in Slack threads, work in open channels, don't hide stuff in DMs, like shared understanding matters. So lead with curiosity, work out loud, build and lead with trust, which is, I found a lot of teams struggle with role definition. They struggle with like believing the other person is an adversary or is like out to get their job or they're worried about stepping on toes. Like you have to like be willing to have the hard conversations and navigate around those things, because game development is so hard and interdisciplinary. So much of my time as a leader of user experience teams and creative teams is literally just getting people in a room and being like, what's your job? What's your job? Which parts overlap? How do you want them to work? And once you get that clarity, I have seen like overnight transformation in teams. I have seen overnight transformation in teams that like speak different languages in other countries. It's amazing how much of our uncertainty really comes down to not understanding the other people around us, which is part of why some of the chapters in my book are around like, here's a list of all the disciplines in game design and game development, in case you didn't know where to start. Because that can be embarrassing, right? Like, what is a technical designer? That's book. But the last one is solve the right problems, because lead with curiosity I've also seen used as a weapon where people are like, but I can ask anything. I can do whatever I want. But at the end of the day, we want to solve problems that are worth solving. And that requires asking questions in an intentional way that gets us to the point like, is this right for the business? Is this right for players? Is this the right use of our limited resources when there are infinite things we could be doing right now? There are so many times when a person has an objective, like they want to do a solution and they can't, or they want to do a solution, but they haven't figured out, is that the right solution for the problem it was trying to solve? And when I ask my teams to take a step back, usually the solution was sort of like a trick. It got us thinking about a problem, and then we get to an even better solution. So that's how I lead teams, is encourage them to lead with curiosity, encourage them to build trust with each other, and lead like transparently build an understanding with each other. We work out loud, we document what we do, we work in open channels, we work as transparently as is legally possible, and we solve the right problems. And that helps teams go from kind of operating slowly to doing great things together.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Hi, I'm Molly. I'm a first-year MFA in the IMGD program. And I was curious about your experience working both in the games industry and beyond the games industry. And I was really interested by you identifying, Blizzard, doing player research into how to make more pro-social interactions between their players, but you notice that that doesn't happen as much in non-game spheres. And I was wondering what you think the root of that might be and how we could address that if we are moving into these other spheres.
Well, and it's to be fair, I have more experience in the game sphere as other spheres, right? So I know of the Thriving in Games group and the great work that many of these companies are doing in these spaces. There may be similar work, but I've not seen it socialized at the same level as I'm seeing because the Thriving in Games group, who wrote the Digital Thriving Playbook, which is got folks from Riot and Blizzard and a bunch of other companies, tons of companies contributing, Electronic Arts, but they're also collaborating with companies like the Sesame Workshop, right? Like it's a really industry-leading sort of consortium there. To your question, part of it, this one's a tough one because I think it's dissolving that perception that games are other. Movies and TV aren't really seen as other anymore, but games are still like, oh, games cause societal ills. Like, well, I mean, the societal ills were there before. Like, the games can cause as much positivity as they can cause negativity, and in many cases, like, one thing we don't get enough credit for on my podcast, the number of people who are like, well, my first leadership experience was a World of Warcraft guild. Like, we don't talk about that. We do not talk about that enough. There's a whole generation of people who literally have job skills because they played WoW. And like, honestly, maybe that's on us as an industry to start socializing those stories more. Because like there's data there, there's research studies there about like genuine cognitive benefits. I think we just need the rest of the industry to understand.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think that's all the questions we have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. This has been an incredible conversation. We learned so much.
And thank you for your patience as I changed locations and weathered the fire alarm. But this has been thank you for the really, really great questions. Great questions are always a sign that folks are engaged and listening. So I really appreciate it. And I wish all of you the best as you continue to explore your games and bring people engaging experiences that make it fun to get up in the morning and be a human.